Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Fellowship family, it's a pride privilege to extend you a warm welcome to this virtual academic program of Fellowship family. Hence, as per the previous announcement made by our admin Professor Pramod Das, today we have organized the fourth special webinar for students, research scholars, and the newly joined faculties of philosophy in our country. Our objective behind it to prepare the young scholars of philosophy to be the extempore speakers and to be the excellent teachers of philosophy so that they can inspire others for the reflective thinking and philosophical thinking. The young scholars, those have been invited today to this webinar, they are Ms. Ankita Padir, Mrs. Manorama Mohanty, Mr. Rabindra Pradhan, and Mr. Jagannath Maharana. I welcome all of them to this special webinar program. I would like to welcome our admin, Professor Pramod Das, and our moderator, Dr. K. Umdan Rao, to this Sunday webinar. With this, I also welcome our senior faculty member of our country, Professor Avinash, and others to this virtual Sunday webinar of this. So today, I don't want to spare much time because today we have 4 young scholars to speak on the scheduled topic, and all the papers have been supervised by our admin Professor Pramod Das, Head, Department of Philosophy, Noyagada Autonomous College. I welcome all the scholars and their guide, Professor Pramod Das. With this, I Pradhan sir, a lecturer in philosophy, Surajmal Saha College, Puri. His topic is Sabda Pramana as a source of knowledge, and his paper is guided by Professor Pramod Das, Head Department of Philosophy, Noyagada Autonomous College, Noyagada. Now, I would like to request Mr. Rabindra Pradhan sir to commence at talk. Over to Rabindra sir.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, audible, clearly.
I respected all the professors and respected the judges and my friends and my supervisor, respected Professor Pramod Das sir. Well, I'll be speaking on Sabda Pramana under the title Sabda Pramana as a source of knowledge. So, to know is an innate tendency of human being, because knowledge, that is Prama, has the capacity to make human being free from suffering and bondage. Suffering and bondage, which are always avoided, are caused by lack of knowledge. Here, therefore, knowledge means right or true cognition, that is jnana, which is different from wrong or false cognition, that is a lack of knowledge or ignorance. Here, jnana means cognition and prama means knowledge. But the question here is, where does the wrong or false cognition come from? In order to respond to this question, we have to visit the knowledge mechanism. There are 3 necessary conditions by which every piece of knowledge is possible, namely subject, object of knowledge, and sources of knowledge. If we talk about these conditions through NAT terminology, it clearly says that the concept of prama or valid knowledge consists of 3 necessary conditions, namely pramata, that is the subject, pramaya, that is the object of knowledge, and pramana, that is the source of knowledge. Each one of the 3 conditions is of necessary requirement for the establishment of knowledge as an end. These three conditions taken together constitute the sufficient condition for the establishment of Brahma, that is valid knowledge. Valid knowledge, therefore, cannot be established without any one of them. And if any problem is found in knowledge, it is because of one or more conditions of knowledge. So, far source of knowledge is concerned, though these three conditions have a necessary requirement for the knowledge, Naya system gives a special status to the sources of knowledge. As Tataji writes, a pramana is always accompanied by valid knowledge, which in its turn can never arise without the former. Of course, there can be no valid knowledge without a subject and an object, but every case of existence of subject and object is not necessarily a case of the appearance of prama or valid knowledge. On the contrary, in every case in which a pramana is operative, prama or valid knowledge must appear as a natural sequel. New Theory of Knowledge, page number 80. Therefore, the study of pramanas, that is the sources of knowledge, are of paramount importance among all the questions of knowledge for all the philosophical systems in general. Pramanas are of four kinds for Nyaya. Gautama declares in his Nyaya Sutra 113, Pramana pratikshanu mano sabdaha pratikshani pramanani. There are other two pramanas which are advocated by Mimamsakas, namely postulation, that is arthapatti, and non-apprehension, that is anupalapti. Pramanas, therefore, are namely perception, inference, analogy, verbal testimony, postulation, and non-apprehension. If Sabda, that is verbal testimony, is taken to be one of the sources of knowledge, then the first and foremost duty of a scholar is to study it thoroughly to avoid any sort of misconception concerning knowledge. In respect of Sabda Pramana, the important problem that I am interested to discuss here is why Sabda Pramana is required as an independent source of knowledge. Before discussing the problem, which is the chief concern of this paper, it is expected to have a brief discussion pertaining to the question, what is Sabda Pramana? Sabda has have varieties of meanings from the, sorry, am I audible, sir?
It's audible.
Uh, Sabda has have varieties of meanings from the different standpoints. From the standpoint of etymology, Sabda means sound, noise, tone, which is uttered by animals and human beings. From the standpoint of literalism, Sabda means word, it is pada, which is a linguistic unit. Apart from these two general meanings, there is another distinctiveness of Sabda is that as a general term, it can stand for any whole endeavor of language. From this point of view, therefore, it can be restricted to any unit of language. Over and above these, there are other two meanings of Sabda, namely metaphysical meaning and epistemological meaning. The metaphysical meaning of Sabda may be a substance, that's for Kumarila, or a quality for Vaisesika. The epistemological meaning of Sabda is a source of knowledge at a Sabda Pramana. We are concerned here with the last one, that is Sabda as a source of knowledge. But the question arises, what a Sabda Pramana is? Ashtapada, the author of Nyaya Sutra, is of opinion that the word is a kind of means of knowledge. He defines Sabda, Aptopadesaha Sabdaha, that is the instruction of a reliable person. This definition of Sabda is regarded as a norm by most of the philosophers, though they take this definition as a norm, but at the same time they disagree on the point of interpretation of this definition. This definition is a combination of two concepts, namely apto and upadesa. Concerning the meaning of upadesa, there is no problem among the philosophical schools, whereas Concerning the meaning of Apta, there are two kinds of interpretations have been given by thinkers, namely Apta as a person and Apta as word. From the standpoint of these two different interpretations of Apta, there are two different explanations of the definition of Sabda, namely explanation based on a relation and explanation based on qualification. The interpretation based on relation is aptaha tasya upadesaha, which means the words of a reliable person. On the other hand, the interpretation based on qualification is aptasya upadesaha, which means reliable words. Testimony, therefore, is of two sorts, namely secular and spiritual and scriptural. Whether subject is secular or scriptural, regarded as an independent source of knowledge by Nyaya, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. But the question here is, what is the requirement of Sabda Pramana as an independent source of knowledge? If we analyze the problem, we get two different sorts of questions. Namely, is there any specialness for Sabda Pramana which other Pramanas don't have? Secondly, does it possess equal status as perception and inference have in relation to the concept of independence? In response to the first question, the thesis here is that the restrictions or limitations of other pramanas implies the specialness of Sabda Pramana. In order to show the limitation of pramanas, we have to look at the time argument. What is this time argument? We have three sorts of objects of knowledge from the point of view time, namely object of present time, object of past time, and objects of future time. Here the question is, can a source of knowledge capable of providing knowledge of objects all time? Let's examine perception first. The very nature of perception is the contact between sense organ and object. In other words, where there is no physical contact, there is no perception. Being physical, sense organs are of no capacity to go beyond of present time. Through perception, therefore, we can know objects of physical world in the present time only. Sat Prakashananda therefore writes, our perception has a limited scope. We perceive only what is here and now, that is, what is present to the senses. For the knowledge of what is beyond this limit, we depend as a rule either on inference for our past experience or on testimony. Methods of knowing, page number 175. Thus, besides the objects of our physical world in present time, there are other objects of knowledge which are from other time zone, namely past and future. Perception, therefore, is not sufficient for acquiring knowledge about all the world. After perception, inference is the source of knowledge which is mostly accepted, except Charvak school. The foundation of inference is Vyapti, on which the edifier of inference is built up. Now the question is, what is the relation between Vyapti and time? Vyapti is a knowledge of invariable concomitance between two concepts, for example, smoke and fire, which is established by past experience. Due to dependence on past experience, inference can give knowledge of past and future events in some extent. Satprakashan further writes, though of a much wider scope that perception, inference is quite restricted, being dependent on it. We can infer only what has been previously observed to be invariably related to something that is being perceived. And since the scope of our personal experience is limited, it is the words of the reliable persons, such as know truly and communicate correctly, that serve as our main source of knowledge. Methods of knowing, page number 175. It therefore fails to give knowledge of the world. because we cannot experience all the events of the world. Similarly, other sources of knowledge are capable of providing knowledge of present time or other time zones. Still, there are objects of knowledge, objects of world, which are known only through oral testimony. The second question concerning the independence of Sabda Pramana compels the philosophers for entering to the debate. The issue here is whether Sabda Pramana is to be taken as an independent source of knowledge or not. Regarding this problem, there are two groups of philosophers who have given their concern. One view is called positive approach. Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and Vedanta accepts Sabda as an independent source of knowledge. On the other hand, Charvaka, Buddhism, and Vaisheshika, who are the advocates of negative approach, do not accept Sabda as an independent source of knowledge. And not only the problem occupies a focal concern in ancient period, but also J.N. Mohanty and B.K. Motilal in their several writings have given their arguments concerning the problem. Mohanty, like the negative approach, is of opinion that Sabda cannot be taken as an independent source of knowledge. Motilal, like the positive approach and unlike Mohanty, provides his rationale in support of the independence of Sabda. The advocates of a negative approach are of opinion that Sabda should be taken as an independent source of knowledge, should not be taken as an independent source of knowledge. They reduce Sabda Pramana either to perception or inference. It is the Charvaka school who reduces Sabda Pramana to perception. They argue that Sabda is nothing but perception because we hear Sabda. By way of, they would say, as visual and rights, they do not approve of its enumeration as a distinct source of knowledge, since they are opposed to believe anything on others' statements, because in that case they think that they would have to believe the utterances of any fool. It continues. Indian Theories of Knowing, page number 214. They therefore reduce Sabda to perception and deny the independence of Sabda. Vaisheshika, the sister school of Nyaya, is of opinion that Sabda Pramana should be reduced to inference. The argument they propose is, since in both the cases one has to know an unperceived object from the perception of some related object, in Sabda we know the unperceived object from the perception of words related to these objects. Vaisheshika therefore do not accept verbal testimony as an independent source of knowledge. Furthermore, Mohanty, a great scholar, makes a declaration that the point I am making is that in the case of Laukika Sabda or ordinary word referring to perceptible objects, its knowledge-giving function is a parasitical upon perception and inference and is not an independent one. Reason and tradition in Indian thought 1 252. In response of the above objections concerning the independence of verbal testimony, the philosophers of a positive approach provide reasons. Sabda Pramana, they argue, cannot be reduced to perception because perception has its own limitation, that it gives knowledge of present world only, whereas a verbal testimony gives knowledge of unpresentable reality as well. One cannot perceive all the world because we are limited by our physical body, without which perception is not possible. If one says that America doesn't exist because I haven't perceived it, this kind of argumentation leads to solipsism. In this connection, Datta would say the dependence of a testimony on perception cannot be denied, but perception gives us only the knowledge of what sounds and nothing more. It tells us nothing about the facts known through testimony. It therefore should be taken as an independent source of knowledge. Concerning to the second objection, verbal testimony can be reduced to inference. The advocates of projective approach would say, particularly Nyaya, that it is a fact of common experience that a verbal comprehension takes place even without the knowledge of invariable concomitants. There is no certainly evidence to prove that the hearing of a word is always followed by the knowledge of invariable concomitance of the word and its primary meaning. Thus, a Vyapti cannot be established, which is the essential component of inference, and the verbal testimony should not be reduced to the inference. In response of Mohanty's objection, verbal testimony is not an independent source of knowledge because it depends on perception and inference. Datta would say dependence of this kind is present even in perception and inference. Perception would have been impossible. It would remain a mere sensation without the help of reproduction and intellectual synthesis. Inference would have been impossible again if the data were not supplied through perception and testimony or memory. And if, in spite of these facts, perception or inference can be regarded as an independent source of knowledge, there is no reason why testimony also should not be so regarded. Testimony as a method of knowing, 356. Most of our knowledge is gained through either uttered or written language. We gain knowledge about history through language, that is Sabda Pramana. In this regard, Mohanty argues. So when we are remain rightly, I think what an enormous amount of knowledge we possess derives from reading books and newspapers, amongst others, taken to be competent say that fact cannot be used to prove that Sabda is a Pramana. It is a tradition Indian theory of Indian theory of thought. Page number 252. Thus, Mohanty is in doubt whether Sabda Pramana or verbal testimony can generate knowledge. He doesn't think that reading and listening are the justifications for taking verbal testimony as an independent source of knowledge. Whereas Motilal takes a different position. He argues we get knowledge from verbal testimony in a great extent. He therefore writes, strictly speaking, most of our knowledge today is derived from reading and listening. Hence, we can say that it is linguistically communicated. The word and the world, page number 5. Thus, philosophers have different views concerning the independence of verbal testimony. In fact, we get knowledge of history and even if about future through verbal testimony only. We can say this is the distinctness of verbal testimony. We take one statement as it is. We do not doubt unless we have sufficient grounds for doubt. Professor Montes, in his book, The Ways of Knowing, therefore writes that man is a suggestible animal and tends to believe what is said to him unless he has some positive reasons for doubting the honesty or competence of his informant. Therefore, it is the most effective source of knowledge. We may conclude, therefore, on the above discussion that verbal testimony, that is Sabda, can be taken as an independent source of knowledge, like perception and inference. The objections that have been refuted by philosophers and provided reasons why verbal testimony is to be taken as an independent source of knowledge. Thank you.
Okay, uh, thanks so much, Rabindra sir, for your very clear and thought-provoking paper on Sabda Pramana as a source of knowledge from uh, from philosophy, and you have put your stand also. And at first, you have defined the Sabda, and you have also given a clear definition of Sabda Pramana. And you have tried to put your stand on Sabda Pramana in comparison to other Pramanas. And with this, you have also tried to give the criticism, interpretation, and arguments of some Indian philosophers like Mohanty, Motilal, and others. And at last, you have tried to prove that whether Sabda Pramana is an independent source of knowledge, or it can be reduced to other source of knowledge, or it is dependent upon other source of knowledge. And you have put your own stand that it might be the independent source of knowledge. So, as a young scholar, your consistency in thinking of the concept and your consistency in preparing this beautiful paper is really appreciated. I have nothing to say. I only congratulate you for preparing such a very good paper. Now, I would like to request Professor Om Narana to have his introduction with others. Over to Dr. Rao.
Thank you, Dr. Maharana. Well, I should also thank Rabindra for his good paper and his exposition on the subject. Well, um, let us move to Jayanti Madam first. Okay, to have our observations and then we carry on. Jayanti Madam. Well, is Jayanti Madam there? अच्छा 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 Deepak Kumar Behera, he has a question. What comes first, Sabda or thought?
Uh, so it's a question it is about debate, but by referring Bhartrhari, I can say Sabda is first because Sabda is that principle without which we cannot think even it. Therefore, Sabda is first. Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Rabindra Pradhan, he sees that, say, Sabda, or you can say in a broader sense, language is that which helps us to think in that language. So, animals think in their own language. The way human beings, we do think in our own language. So, taking that philosophy, he says Sabda is first. So, for any thought to be possible, he takes language as a means to the thought. So, he takes that position. Well, Jayanti Madam, are you there? Well, Jayanti Madam is not ready there. Well, anybody who has a question for Rabindra Behera, Rabindra Pradhan? Well, so, I'm not really, actually, I don't have a question to the real sense. How to account for the statements, say, of the theological persons who make assertions concerning God, okay, or even the scientists who make assertions about the invisible, okay, the microparticles. Okay, we do have assertions on the one side of the theological persons who make assertions about the whole, the cosmos, or even something beyond the cosmos. I don't know. So it's at the macro level, some sort of assertions that do come, and we are now sure of that. And down the ground, down to the material bodies, the scientists speak of the micro energies, the microparticles. Okay, so how do you put your entire scheme, okay, of Sabda Pramana to convince that these assertions of the theological persons on the one hand and the scientists on the other hand, they do have strength and they can be accepted as a source of knowledge? Rabindra, please.
Sir, actually, really I couldn't grasp the question. Please elaborate.
Okay. Suppose a religious person speaks of God. So these are again statements by a religious person. The statements about God. Okay. Okay. Now this is on the one side. The other side, the statements of scientists about the microscopic particles. Okay. Even the scientists are not sure that what they have covered is the final are the final ones. Okay, but still we are in a position to somehow accept the scientists. Even the persons with a religious bent of mind have an acceptance for some sort of acceptance for the theological statements. Now, taking both the problems on both the sides, on the religious side and on the scientific side, how can you suggest, or what do you suggest? okay, would help us to rely on the statements made by the theological persons and the scientific people or the scientific men concerning the reliability of their assertions. You're talking of Sabda Pramana. Okay. Now you got, I think, or still
Sir,
clear.
actually, these theological and scientific field to uh, separate fields, and scientists in science and theologians in theology, they are the experts. We can say they are the aptos on their field. So if one has to go with spirituality, he should follow the or he should take of the theology as a source of knowledge. If someone goes to believe the scientific theories, so he can go with the words of scientists by taking as a source of knowledge. So I think
Okay,
this much I can say.
okay, Rabindra Pradhan. Well, he says, well, will it be religious ground? Will it be the scientific ground? The assertions made by the religious persons and the assertions made by the scientific men do constitute the source of knowledge. And he says, but his paper says Sabda has an independent source of knowledge. But these assertions of the scientists or the assertions of the religious men, are they not the assertions of inference based on inference? You say Sabda is an independent source of knowledge, but the scientific men, okay, the conclusions of the scientific men and the assertions of the religious men, okay, you see, are you getting my point? There is a vast reason of the unknown in both the cases. There is a vast reason of the unknown in for both the religious men and also the scientific men. Okay, the scientific assertions are also not final and binding. They are subject to change. So that's how the reliability of the scientific men is also under a scanner, like the reliability of the theological men. So taking in that light, are we not reducing Sabda to inference, at least in these two senses?
No, actually there is no Vyakti. We cannot say that this kind of word is followed or this the meaning is followed by this kind of word. The words are meaningful by the intention of the speaker, by the context. Therefore, there is not a relation which is invariable, which is also essential for Vyakti. If Vyakti is not established, then we cannot say or we cannot reduce the belief of the to inference. Therefore, we should have a concern of independence of Sabda Pramana.
So finally, you resort to. Finally, you take the help of Vyapti because even in these cases, Vyapti is very difficult to establish. So you say it cannot be an independent source of knowledge. Well, Jayanti madam, please, are you there? Well, Jayanti madam is absent. Maybe. Well, Pramod sir, please,
No,
your words.
I have only
Yes,
okay
yes, sir.
clarification.
You have some question. Yes, sir. Dr. Maharana. Dr. Maharana.
Okay. I have little clarification on Sabda that sometimes Sabda can be reduced to silence. And Wittgenstein says that wherever you cannot speak up, you have to remain silence. So, what kind of meaning does it signify? Is there any epistemological meaning or metaphysical meaning of Sabda, or what kind of meaning that Sabda signifies?
So the scope of Sabda can be extended uh, with except written or speaking. So because without any mode or source, we cannot communicate. In order to communicate, we have to follow a medium, except the spiritual experiences. So Actually, I forgot. I forgot.
Pramod sir, okay, Pramod sir, please respond on it.
Thank you. Rabindra sir is simply saying that there are many sources of knowledge and Sabda Pramana is an independent source of knowledge. This is his assertion. Okay. And there are so many counter arguments. Many thinkers claim that Sabda Pramana is related to perception. Some claimed that it is related to inference, but their claims did not stand. I also agree that there is no relation between Sabda Pramana with the perception and inference. Sabda Pramana is an independent source of knowledge. But the point is, any pramana or any source of knowledge is not knowledge. We mistake source of knowledge as knowledge. Perception is not knowledge. Perception is the source of knowledge. So my perception may be different from your perception. My inference may be different from your inference. Similarly, my language will be different from your language. So there shall be gap in communication. Rabindra sir also said, language is conventional. Language is decided by a man, that we shall have such and such vocabulary and we shall manage to describe the reality according to this format of language. And we all agree to that format and we exchange our thought. We exchange our thought by that format. So which is first? Thought is first or language is first? Thought is first. Then we try to, sometimes we fail to communicate. We try to communicate our thought by a symbol, by a symbolic way. If I shall have this type of a symbolic expression or utterance, then you will mean that. So that is a mutual agreement whenever we are using language, the speaker and the listener. If two people belonging to two different languages they speak, then there is no communication. Though they have thoughts. They have thoughts, but they fail to communicate because they don't understand the language of the other. Therefore, the reality is indescribable. Therefore, Vedantists take language in the negative way. Neti, not this, not this, not this. This is also a form of language to describe something negatively because we fail to describe something positively. So this is the inadequacy of language, that we can't accommodate our thoughts through language. But this is an independent source of knowledge, and he beautifully said about time concept. What happens in case of inference? There are two types of inference. One is material inference and the other is formal inference or logical inference. What happens in material inference? There we don't need any language. Material, suppose there is cloud and rain. There is no, if suppose no language is there, this inference will be there. Suppose we don't name a cloud as a cloud. Suppose we don't name a rain as a rain. Then also this inference will take place in the nature. But when we do that inference logically, mathematically, deductively, in the form of a premise and a conclusion, there we play with language and the rules of logic. So this is the contribution of language, that we fix a meaning, fixation of a meaning. We fix a meaning, and if it is granted, then um, that meaning will continue in the conclusion. So this is an agreement. By that way, we understand each other. By that way, we communicate between each other. Thirdly, he is saying that it transcends time. How it transcends time? Suppose I am reading a book. The author has written that book before 1000 years. So I can get knowledge of 1000 years back. So it has no time limit, but whenever there is a perception that will occur at a particular time, at present I perceive something and I got perception. In inference also there is a time sequence, but in verbal testimony, whenever, therefore it is said that the book is the great treasure, because that speaks of the past, that speaks of the future. Okay, so it transcends time. So in that sense, the value of Sabda Pramana is more appreciated than other sources of knowledge. Therefore, when we listen to a speaker, we gather the knowledge that has been accumulated by, grasped by the speaker who has read so many books, and we get that experience from that speaker by the means of a Sabda Pramana. So reading and using language, reading and perhaps listening, reading and listening, that transcend time limitation. In that sense, it is not only independent, it is also a very vast and a fast way of knowing. Very vast and very fast way of knowing. This is his contribution. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Rao.
We shall.
Dr.
Yes.
Rao.
Yes, sir.
Okay, due to constraint of time, actually we have to move to the
The next
okay,
joint